Today's lesson comes from Chapter 2-6, Solving Multiplication and Division Equations, and our goal, like the last two lessons we've done, is to use inverse operations, but this time we're going to be solving multiplication and division equations. The first thing we need to do when we encounter an equation like this is figure out what type of operation we have. This time I don't see an operation symbol, but what I do notice is that I have a number 4 right next to a variable. So I remember that when a number is right next to a variable, I'm going to use multiplication in order to describe that expression. So we have 4 times n equals 68. So just like I've done the last two lessons, I want to use the inverse operation here. So I know if I have multiplication to start here, I'm going to need to do a division in order to undo that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this side by 4 so that those cancel. Why that works is that if I have a fraction 4 over 4, I can divide the numerator and denominator by the same value, because 4 goes evenly into both, and I'm going to get 1 over 1. And I know if I have one n, that equals the same thing as just an n itself. That's what n means. I have one of them. The one is understood. So I can divide the left side of the equation by 4 to cancel those out. That helps me to isolate the variable and get the n all by itself. What I have to do, or what I do to one side of the equation, though, I have to make sure I do to the other side. So I'm also going to divide this side by 4. Now 68 divided by 4 is not a mental problem for me, so I'm going to just find some scrap paper, some space on the side, and do my long division. And I notice that 4 goes in one time, I get 2, bring down the 8, and it goes in 7 times, so I have 17. I still want to keep that format of showing what I do to both sides of the equation, and then isolating my variable to get my final answer. So I'm going to have n equals 17. In this example, we have a decimal, but the first thing I notice, again, is the operation. With the number being right next to the variable like that, it's going to signify that I have multiplication shown. So in order to do the inverse to isolate the variable, I'm going to be dividing by 0.8. Again, these cancel, they become 1. Any number over the other number is 1. So that leaves my p all isolated, and I need to divide by 0.8. Now, good reminder of decimal division. I'm going to need to divide 32 by 0.8. I don't want my divisor, though, to be a decimal number. So in order to get rid of that, I'm going to move my decimal over one spot so that instead of 0.8, I have just the number 8. But, kind of like with an equation, if I change the divisor, I also have to change the dividend. So 32, I don't see a decimal place, but I know the only place to put one would be right after it. That wouldn't change the value of 32. So I'm also going to move that one over 1, fill it in with a 0. So now my problem looks like 320 divided by 8. So I know that 8 goes into 32 4 times. Gives me 32. I get 0. So it looks like 40 is going to be my answer. So P equals 40. Would be my final answer. Again, really important that I show what I did to both sides and where I canceled in order to isolate that variable. Following my first step of advice of looking at the operation, this time I notice I have a slash. The slash represents division. So if I want to do the inverse operation of division, I'm going to have to do multiplication. So if I multiply this side by 6.4, that'll cancel out all this value to help me isolate my variable y, but I also have to multiply this side by 6.4. So I can set it up this way. If you don't like having the one-digit number on top, you're more than welcome to go over to the side, set up your problem like this, and do your multiplication. I'm just going to keep it simple and go up here. So I have 32 and 48, 51, and I know my decimal is one place over, so it should be one place over in my answer. So 51 and 2/10 will be my final answer. Again, the first thing I'm going to draw my attention to in this problem is the operation symbol, which happens to be division again. So in order to undo division and isolate my variable, I'm going to multiply by 1.5. Those opposite operations will cancel. I have W isolated, and I'm going to multiply 1 and 5/10. So if I do that, I'm going to get I'm going to get 150. Again, I have one decimal place, so my decimal here is going to move over 1. So I'm going to have 15 as my answer here. At this point, if you're starting to get the hang of it, I really suggest that you pause the video, give this and the last example a try on your note skeleton, and then see if your answer compares, making any changes as needed. But when I start to take a look at this, what I notice is I have a division symbol. So in order to undo that, I'm going to multiply by 2 and 6/10 so that those cancel. I need to make sure I do that same thing over on the right side. I've now isolated my variable b over on the left, and I need to do my multiplication in order to simplify what I have on the right. And if I take a minute to do my multiplication, really important that you take your time and make sure you get it copied down correctly. But after I go through, I then need to determine where my decimal goes. This time I had 2 total spaces after the decimal, so if I move it over 2, I'm going to have 20 and 54 hundredths. For our last problem together, we're going to look at 3 and 4/10 W equals 22 and 916 thousandths. The first thing I notice is that with the number right next to the variable, that indicates multiplication. So in order to solve this equation, I'm going to need to start out by doing the opposite of multiplication, which I know is division. So I'm going to divide this side by 3 and 4/10. If I divide this side by 3 and 4/10, I'm going to have to do the same thing on this side. And I accidentally put a 1, but I'm just going to cross that out for now. So I have 3 and 4/10 on both sides. Now again, this is a problem. I've isolated my variable. In order to figure that out, that's not a problem I can do in my head. So I'm going to use some scrap paper, some paper on the side. I'm going to set up my division problem. So I know that inside my box I'm going to have to put the 22, 916. The reason I do that is because that's the first number. I'm taking the dividend, the number that comes first, and I'm dividing it by my divisor, the second number. In order to do this division, I'm going to need to make 3 and 4/10 a whole number. So I'm going to move the decimal over to make 34. Then I have to do the same thing in my problem. I'm going to put that decimal in my answer right away so that I don't forget. And I want to see how many times 34 goes into 229. I'm going to guess that's probably about 5 or 6 maybe. If I did 10 times 34, I'd get 340, which is a little much. So let's try 34 times 5. That looks like it'd be a good guess. I get 170. Looks like that was too small. I think I should have gone up to 36. So let me try times 6. So let's try what happens if I do that. Here I'm going to get 204. That looks a lot better. If I add another 34, I'm going to go into the 230s. I know that's too high. So 6 is going to be my value on top, and then 6 times 34 gave me 204. So I'll put that down there and do my subtraction. I'll get 25. Then I need to bring down my 1. So 250. So it looks like 34 could have gone in another time in order to get a little bit higher and a little closer to 251. So if I try that out, I'm going to get 238. I know again if I add another 35 I'm going to go well over the 260, so that's too high. So 7's going to go up here. My 238 at the bottom. I'm going to subtract. I'm going to need to do some borrowing. And I get 130. I'm going to bring the 6 down. And let's see. Looks like maybe one less than times 5. So if I do 34 times 4, I'm going to get 16 and 136, which is exactly what I was looking for. So my answer is going to be 6 and 74 hundredths. And I'm going to place that back in my original problem. So my W is going to equal 6 and 74 thousandths. At this point, go ahead and try the rest of the problems on your note skeleton using the same format of showing what we do to each side of the equation in order to isolate the variable using those inverse operations. So pay careful attention to whether you have multiplication or division.